Shabbat Shalom. If there's a connection between last week's parasha and this week's parasha, it's a connection of numbers. Last week we read about the commandment to count the Omer of the days between Passover and Shavuot, count 49, and then on the 50th day you'll arrive at Shavuot. In this week's Torah portion we read about the 49 years that one counts until one gets to the Jubilee, that there is a cycle of a sabbatical cycle, of a 7-year cycle. You count 7 of those cycles, 49 years, and then year 50 is the Jubilee, in which all lands return to their original owners, in which all servants go free, in which there's a restoring and an allowance to forgive all debts. Everything returns to the way it was. And what's this all about? What's the connection 49 and 50, counting 49 days to Shavuot and the 49 years that lead us to the Jubilee? Well, there's a way of thinking about the sabbatical year that I believe is fundamental to who we are and to how we exist. We exist because God wants us to exist. Our ability to eat off of a land or to feed off of a land and to grow produce and to sustain ourselves is because this is the world that God designed, and the sabbatical year gives us an insight into that, and it reminds us every 7 years, yes, and then again every 50 years in the Jubilee cycle. It reminds us of God's ultimate power, that we don't own land, that we have the right to live on it, and that we have the ability to live off of it, but ultimately the owner of the land is the Almighty, and that's something that all of humanity shares, is that we're living on and off of God's land. There's a story that's told by Yehoram Tahar Lev about one of the great teachers, storytellers, singers, and songwriters in Israel. And he tells the story of an impoverished man who has a big family. And he goes to one of the wealthy people in the community and he says to him, "Listen, you have a really big house, but your children are grown up and they've moved out, and I have a big family, but I have a very small house. Maybe we could exchange houses, or maybe you could just give me your house. You don't need it. You have a lot." And the generous man, the wealthy man, thinks for a moment. He says, "Actually, the argument makes a great deal of sense. Yeah, let me give this man my house." And so he says, "Okay, here are the keys. My house is yours on one condition. There's a nail on the living room wall. You have to keep that nail in the wall. That nail is mine. It belongs to me. The rest of the house you can have. Is that okay with you?" And the poor man, never heard such a good deal. "Of course you can keep the nail on the wall, but I'll take the house." Fantastic. They shake, they sign, keys are exchanged, and the deal goes through. A few months later, the wealthy man shows up at the door of what used to be his house, and he's holding a painting or a portrait in his hands. He says, "This is a picture of my parents. My parents built this house. I think it's only right that their picture should be on the wall of the house. So I still have my nail there, right? Yes. So I'm going to go hang this picture on the nail." And he walks in and hangs the picture on the nail, and really no big deal because it was a free house. That's pretty amazing. But a few months pass, and the wealthy man shows up again, and this time he's holding a heavy winter coat. And he says, "I live in a very small house right now, and the weather's getting warmer, and I don't need my winter coat again for another few months, so I'm just going to hang it on my nail because it makes sense. Sure, okay." A few months later, the wealthy man shows up again. This time, he's leading a goat on a leash. And he says, "I'm going away on vacation, and I need a place to leave my goat while I'm away, so I'm just going to tie the leash to the nail." Oy vey. A few months later, he shows up again with a cow on a leash. He says, "My cow, she's pregnant, and I can't risk her staying in the barn with the other animals. She'll get disease. She has to be protected. So I'm just going to leave her in here and going to tie the leash to the nail." At this point, of course, the house it's unlivable with a cow and a goat tied to the nail. And the man, and the impoverished man, gives up, and he says, "I realize now that it was never my house, that as long as you maintained ownership over that one nail, the house was yours all along." And that's part of the message of the sabbatical year, is that once every 7 years, we say to God, "You know what? We might have thought over these 6 years of working the land and of benefiting from from our produce. We may have thought that it actually belongs to us, but we realize now, in this sabbatical year, when we have to let the land just be itself and we can't work the land, we realize the whole time that we were just deceiving ourselves, that it was yours. It was yours the whole time. And then we get to the Jubilee year, which reminds us tenfold of this, or sevenfold, I should say, of this lesson, is that really it all belongs to God and that nothing is ours. We're just here, we're renting, we're borrowing, but nothing really belongs to us. We've been entrusted with God's resources to see what we'll do with them, but ultimately it doesn't belong to us. Rav Moshe Shapiro, of blessed memory, points out that the difference between the 49 and the 50, the difference between the counting of the Omer and Shavuot, the difference between the years of work and the years of the Jubilee, is found in the numerical values of 49 and 50. 49 is the numerical value, the gematria, of the word midah. Midah means a measurement. That's what we do all around us. That's what we do to the land. We see what we can measure. Everything is finite. Everything is limited. That's our lives. They are finite. They are limited. They can be measured. 50 is the numerical value of the Hebrew word yam, which means sea. And from the perspective of somebody standing on the shore, the sea is infinite. It's impossible to measure. It's constantly changing. It's constantly fluctuating. It's constantly dynamic in a way that our lives are not. The sea is infinite, and our lives are finite. And that's the 49 and the 50. That's the counting of the Omer, the counting of the days of our lives, to lead us to Shavuot, which is infinite, which is the Torah. That's the years of work and the cycles of the sabbatical, which lead us to the Jubilee, which lead us to the infinite God as the owner and as responsible for everything that we see, for everything that we can touch, for everything that we can feel, for everything that we can benefit from. Ultimately, it's not ours because our lives are finite, but everything belongs to the infinite God who allows us to live in these places, who allows us to work this land and to benefit from the goodness of the world. But ultimately, the 49 leads to the 50. The finite leads to the infinite. And our dreams and our hope are to be worthy of the blessings of an infinite God, of the sea, of the Yam, of the sea of the Talmud, of the sea of learning, of the sea of Torah, on these days that lead us to Shavuot. 49 leads to 50 inevitably. In last week's Parsha, with the Omer leading to Shavuot, in this week's Parsha of the years of the 7 times 7 sabbatical leading to the Jubilee. And ultimately our lives are part of a journey that leads us through this land of measured, of finite resources, to a place of infinite joy and satisfaction, which is the world of truth and the world of the Torah. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.